So, I'm 2 hours into what should have been a 1-hour meeting, and the beads of sweat are dripping down my face. It's one of my first ever big website copywriting projects, and the founder of a B2B marketing agency has hired me to refresh the copy and make it more compelling. But as we're sat there in the copy review call, huddled virtually over the wireframes I had painstakingly put together, we were going back and forth about word choice. Yeah, Diane, so I was thinking maybe instead of smarter marketing, we should say stronger marketing. How about instead of maximize your impact, we actually say turbocharge your impact? See, make your business work for you just sounds a bit conversational. What about if we say transform your business? And as I was sat there in that call, I had a realization and this sinking feeling that we were essentially cleaning the windows on a burning building. It hit me in that moment that I had made a huge mistake. And it might not be the one that you think. So at the beginning of the project, I had done a really thorough briefing. So I'd asked the client, tell me everything, right? Tell me about your services, tell me about your market, your audience, your competitors, tell me what makes you different, tell me everything why I should choose you. Problem is, the client had given me quite generic answers that just kind of scratched the surface, and I'd accepted them. So in that moment, what happened was that client, who is super smart, by the way, they do really brilliant work, but they just couldn't really articulate what made them different and what value they delivered for their clients. And we all do it, right? So what happened was he was suffering from the curse of knowledge. We all have it. We're all so close to our products and our services sometimes that we struggle to clearly explain what we're all about. And so what I had done, instead of helping them clarify that message, I was essentially helping them find smarter ways to say a fat lot of nothing. Just like putting lipstick on a pig, it might be prettier, but it's still a pig. I realized in that moment that they didn't have a copy problem. This company had a messaging problem, and that's what we needed to fix first. And it's not just my experience. So in this web usability survey, 46% of website visitors said that they left websites because of a lack of messaging. Right? So not because your product isn't good enough, not because the pricing isn't right, but simply because they don't really understand what you're offering. So this is my definition of messaging. Messaging helps you clarify and articulate the most important things about your product and service and why that matters to your audience. So it's a little bit like what Harry Dry touched on earlier, right? Our copy is kind of like that iceberg. It's poking out of the top. It's what you can see. But your messaging is that foundation underneath, holding it all together. And once we have clarity on that, it supports all of your wider marketing and sales efforts and helps everyone tell a clear and consistent story. So not long after that meeting, I decided that I was going to solve the messaging problem. And I did probably what most of us do when we don't know where to start. I asked Google. So I Googled messaging frameworks, and this is what came up. Hundreds of templates, complicated frameworks, and honestly, just loads of contradictory advice. How many of us have got marketing templates sat in your downloads folder on your desktop that you've never used? Yeah, look around, the sea of arms going up. I know I have. So this was me. Photoshop is clearly my forte. This was me just trying to make sense of it all, right? Trying to make sense of all of these templates and frameworks. And I have spent the past 5 years making every mistake in the book. I've created 60-page messaging decks that probably got shoved in a folder and weren't used. I've also tried to shove messaging into like fluffy phrases and statements that are really hard to use as well. And I've tried every single framework under the sun. And this isn't against frameworks. Frameworks do work. And I actually create messaging hubs for clients so they can all tell a better marketing story. But along that way, I realized and discovered that there was one question that helped me so much more than any framework ever did. One really, really simple question. What do you really mean? That's it. What do you really mean? And see, this question cuts through all of the marketing speak, the buzzwords, the jargon, the fluff, and the hype to kind of uncover the meaning behind our messages. So now, today, I run a messaging consultancy. I work with B2B and tech companies, and I help them better explain what the hell they sell and why it matters to their audience. And over the next 15 minutes, I want to share with you 3 principles that I use to create more meaningful messaging with my clients. And I'll show you a few ways for you to apply them to your own marketing so you can uncover the answers to that question, what do you really mean? So the first principle is to connect your messaging to your customer's reality. So when we ask that question, what do you really mean? We have to ground our answer in our customers' actual lived experiences, because we want them to be able to see themselves in our messaging. So if you've ever written sort of impressive claims and you're not sure if they're really connecting with your audience, then this will help. So recently, I worked with a company that sells demand planning and forecasting software for consumer brands. And their messaging claimed that their reporting gave you fast, actionable insights thanks to unified data and automation. Sounds impressive. But I asked that question, like, what do you really mean by actionable insights? How many of us have ever said actionable insights here? We all have. But what does it really mean? So I wanted to know, what does that mean in your day-to-day life for your customers? So I did what I love to do, and I spoke to some of their customers and got on calls. And some of the things that I heard were that some teams were downloading spreadsheets and then uploading them to another tool every single week to see their forecast status. I heard that the teams were spending hours every week pulling data from different sources to create forecast reports. So I spoke to the founder and realized what you're doing is actually saving people so much time, because their tool was pulling from various different sources and allowing team members to have an instant view of forecasts in just a couple of clicks instead of hours. It's a lot more than actionable insights. And this disconnect between our messaging and the reality, it happens all the time. So one thing that I like to do sometimes is run messaging tests with companies. And we put their website copy in front of a panel of their ideal client profile, and we get feedback. And some of the things that I hear are things like, why is it smarter? How is it streamlined? And what's the business need that this is solving for me? So it's not just that our messaging is unclear, it's also that it's really disconnected to their reality. So in some of the messaging workshops that I run with companies and marketing teams, I like to run a really simple test called the reality check test. And it's just 2 simple, easy questions that you can ask about your products and services. What specific problem does your customer face before your product or brand? And then what tangible change happens after they use it? So what can they do? What can they feel? What can they be? And when we do this, we can transform messaging from generic stuff like our intelligent platform, unifies data and automation to give you X, Y, Z, and we can create things that are much more clear and relevant. And it might go something like, our platform pulls every warehouse and supplier into one dashboard, giving you a real-time view of sales and inventory status without CSV uploads or jumping between tools. See the difference in clarity with that message? So once we have a really clear message that actually describes the value of our product, we can then shape that in many different ways in our copy. And that might look something like this. Stop spending Mondays, pulling forecast data, get complete visibility on sales and inventory status in seconds, not hours. So when we ask that question, what do you really mean? We need to make sure that we connect our messaging to our customers' actual reality and their actual lives, so we can get away from all that fluff. So my second principle is one of my favorites, and it's finding that messaging sweet spot. So when we ask that question, what do you really mean? We often need to find that right level of detail in our message. if you've ever struggled to explain what you're all about or what you do without getting like too in the weeds and in the details, or without saying something so vague that kind of sounds like everyone else or your competitors, then this will help. So one of my favorite films is The Sixth Sense. I haven't gone to the cinema in like 10 years, you can probably tell. It's a bit outdated and it's quite old, but it's still a goodie. So let's imagine that I'm trying to convince you guys, my friend will do a bit of role play, that you should go and see The Sixth Sense. By the way, if you haven't seen this in the past like 20 years, like there is a spoiler, so I'm sorry about that. I mean, if you haven't watched it by now, it's about time, right? So I could say The Sixth Sense is a really brilliant thriller. You should go and check it out. Or I could say, this is the spoiler bit, Sixth Sense is a psychological thriller where Bruce Willis plays a child psychologist who is treating a boy who sees dead people, but then you find out that actually he was dead the whole time because he was shot in the beginning. It's really good. You should check it out. I know! You had to put your fingers in your ears. Or I could say, Sixth Sense is a psychological thriller with a mind-blowing twist that when you get to the end of the film, you'll instantly want to go right back to the beginning to watch it again and find out all those clues that you missed. Which one's better? Which one is going to convince you to watch it? The last one, right? And that's because we need to find that sweet spot with our messaging, that middle layer, because all I'm trying to share with you is enough so that you know you might like it, to get you interested, and also to tell you what you can expect. But there's a problem, and one of the reasons that we struggle with this in our marketing is this phrase here. We've been lied to. Benefits over features. How many times as marketers have you been told to sell the sizzle, not the steak? Right? But look at this poor guy. He's starving. He wants a steak. He wants to be sold a steak. He wants to see the steak. He wants you to tell him about the steak. And it's partly our fault as copywriters. How many copywriters have we got here today? Get them. It's their fault. It's our fault, you see. See, I think, and I've said this before too, I think that by saying sell benefits over features, we've done a little bit more harm than we have good. And what's happened is it's turned us as marketers benefit mad, and it's led us to create a sea of empty claims that actually mean nothing to our buyers. So we see everywhere, particularly in B2B, things like grow your revenue, unlock your team's potential, or anything made easy, or my personal favorite, anything redefined. I saw someone shared running redefined recently. I don't know what that means. And the truth is, it isn't benefits or features, it's both. We need them both, and we need balance. A little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our messaging has a hierarchy too, and we need to build from the foundation all the way up to the inspirational. So at that bottom layer, we need to kind of talk about what are the table stakes, what are the table stakes, what can I expect from your product or service? In that middle is where we get to the point, well, what's in it for me? And then at the top, that's where we can talk about that transformational message. How can you transform my situation? But a lot of our marketing does this. And we jump right to the top without establishing any of those lower levels. And when we haven't established those, then that's why those claims can feel so empty. So this is where the specificity scale comes in. So we can map with all of our products and services, we can map things out all the way from the feature and the specifics all the way to benefits. And I want to take you through an example here with a time tracking tool called Toggle that you might know. So we don't want to be too specific with our messaging, right? We could say, process activity data using advanced neural networks to categorize your time entries. It's way too technical, and it's way too overwhelming. All the way on the other end, we could say, it helps you optimize your team workflows. But there are about 1,000 tools out there that could say the exact same thing. So we want to find the messaging that is just right for your buyer, for their stage of awareness, and it might be something like, know exactly where your team's time is going. The reason that this matters so much is because all those messaging roads lead to the same high-level benefits. If we just look at this, we've got Toggle, we've got Asana, we've got Slack. They're all completely different tools. But if we work our way through that scale, all of them can claim that they save you time. So I call this the Goldilocks rule. right? Because we need to find that messaging that is not too specific, that is not too vague, but that is just right. Specific enough to be meaningful, but broad enough to connect to a tangible outcome that your buyers care a lot about. So when we ask that question, what do you really mean? Find that messaging sweet spot between something that is meaningful, but also relevant, not too specific, and not too vague. So that leads us to our last principle. Fill in the gaps that your customers would otherwise assume themselves. So this principle kind of gets a bit under the skin of messaging because it's kind of all about those assumptions that your buyers are going to make and the way that they're going to fill these things in if we don't actually guide them with our messaging. So if you have ever had a buyer or a prospect kind of misunderstand what you're all about or what you're selling, and you're not quite sure why, then this one will help. So we've probably all got that friend who completely misinterprets instructions, right? Like you just tell them to do something really simple, you think it's really easy, really obvious, and they just get it completely wrong. And if you haven't got that friend, it's probably you, sorry. Sometimes this is me, right? But this is just a fundamental truth about humans and how humans work. We're not robots. We don't just process information all the same way. What we do is actively interpret information based on what we think and based on what we know. Now, all of us here leave gaps in our communication. We never say what we really mean, right? If I said to you, I know you've all said this stuff. If I said to you, Joe, if I said to you, I'll bear that in mind, what do I really mean? I mean, not a chance I'm going to do that. If I said to you, Max, with all due respect, what do I mean? I mean, you're an idiot, and I'm about to tell you why, right? So we all do this, and what's actually happening with our marketing is that often our buyers and our customers, they get the wrong idea about our messaging and what we're saying because we fill in gaps, we leave gaps, but also they map meaning onto the things that we say. So they bring along their past experiences with other brands like yours, whether those are good or bad experiences. They latch onto familiar concepts and then disregard and ignore the other ones. They zero in on specific features and then ignore the ones that aren't really relevant. And they're doing all of this to just try and answer the question, what does this replace in my workflow, or is this right for me? So I saw this firsthand when I worked with a digital asset management company. So initially, I heard that their messaging was kind of really shaped all around the category, around being a DAM. So their messaging said that they were a streamlined DAM platform for collaboration and visual content management. Thing is, I asked the founder and the head marketer there, I said, okay, well, what are the companies and the buyers switching from? Like, what are they using before they come and use your tool? And they said, well, actually, most of our customers aren't coming from a specialized DAM. They're coming over from Dropbox, or they're using Google Drive, and we're usually the first DAM that they use. So that was kind of that light bulb moment for our messaging. Because what happened was, by focusing all of their messaging on that high-level category stuff and just being a DAM, they were triggering all of the wrong assumptions in their messaging. So buyers were thinking, well, it seems like an enterprise tool. It's probably not for me. It looks a bit complicated. We're probably going to have to change all of our workflows and do really complex stuff. And so we shifted that messaging to close and fill those gaps and also bring that positioning to life. Because your messaging is that crucial layer between your positioning and your copy. And so we included messages around moving on from Dropbox or Drive, so we explicitly called out what they were replacing. We included messaging about it being the new home for your visual brand assets, and the reason we did that is to contrast that emotional piece from the chaos that they were dealing with before to actually that feeling of zen that people had when they were managing assets with this tool. And this also replicated some of the voice of customer that we'd heard on calls. And we also included messages to show how simple it was to use. So they rolled this out across all of their marketing, layered on with kind of fun and creativity and a really interesting tone of voice. And within 6 months of launching their new website and their new messaging, they'd actually doubled their monthly recurring revenue. Partly because they had closed that gap and answered questions that buyers were kind of making up their own stories about. So ask, what do you really mean? And use this quick gap test with your marketing. Ask, what gap am I leaving for my buyers to fill in themselves? And also, what assumptions might they be making if I don't guide them? So if your messaging isn't connecting the way that it should be, it might be that you don't have a copy problem. Maybe you have a messaging problem. And there's no amount of wordsmithing and polishing that can fix a broken foundation. So instead of doing that tweaking, focus on the meaning of your messaging and drawing that out, and apply these 3 principles that I use in my work. Connect to reality. So make sure that you're grounding your messaging in your customers' actual experiences. Find that messaging sweet spot using the Goldilocks rule, and fill in those gaps that your buyers are otherwise filling in themselves. And learn from my mistakes as well, and next time you find yourself agonizing over word choice and synonyms, just take a step back, maybe take a deep breath too, and ask yourself, what do I really mean? Thank you.